Welcome to Life on the Edge 2. My name is Kathy Brorson and I'm the Outreach Coordinator for Kitsap Credit Union. Before we start today's program, I'd like to share with you a little bit of background about this event. I have the designation of CUDE after my name, that's C-U-D-E, and it stands for, well, you can spell it however you want, but it stands for Credit Union Development Educator. How many other DEs are here in the room today? Raise your hand. That's awesome. I am so excited. Becoming a DE is an innovative, interactive, and intense immersion. It's a training that covers social responsibility, psychology, international issues, domestic finance issues, community development, history, and it's all and other contemporary issues, all under the umbrella of community development. I'm one of about 1,100 U.S. trained DEs, and the other people that just raised their hands in the room as well. And in May of 2012, I created Life on the Edge as my graduation project. So raise your hand if you were at that event. Wow, that's so great to see so many repeat attenders. That's a testimony to the fact that Life on the Edge was a life-changing interactive learning opportunity. First of its kind in the community. And the goal of that was the event was to change people's perception of and response to poverty. And it included an intense simulation exercise where we put 172 people through pretending they were parts of 36 low-income families and gave them different scenarios and let them spend the day walking in somebody else's shoes. The result of that exercise provided each participant a personal and intense journey into the world of poverty that day. And now Life on the Edge 2 is going to take us one step farther. This time it's more than just about personal change. It's about moving beyond oneself into true communication and community collaboration. My intention is to light a passion to change poverty and homelessness in the community through personal engagement. We can't effectively bind and strengthen the fabric of our infrastructure without this kind of an effort. It is our collective engagement that will sustain this kind of a change. Today you're going to be interacting with people from Kitsap, King, Pierce, Mason, and Thurston counties. And raise your hand if you're representing a social service agency. Great. Raise your hand if you're representing a business. Okay. Raise your hand if you're representing law enforcement. All right, well, nobody act up anyway. Raise your hand if you're representing the faith community. Awesome. Raise your hand if you're representing government. Great. And raise your hand if you're representing the community. That should really be all of us, right? As you can see, we do have a great cross-section of the community represented today, and I know how much that's going to add to the richness of our discussions. I'm thrilled you're all here representing both our local and our greater communities, because our strengths are found in our diversity. And I hope that you all take advantage of the incredible networking opportunities that are here today. By the way, that concludes our upper body workout. Okay. All right, so some things that you're going to need to know for today. Should you need them, the restrooms are located at the end of the gallery. Go over to the receptionist area, and it's kind of wrapped around behind there. I'm also so thankful for the support of many community sponsors who include the Northwest Credit Union Foundation, Kitsap Credit Union, Kitsap Community Resources, Kitsap Community Foundation, Bremerton Housing Authority, the Kitsap County Commissioners, the United Way, the Suquamish Tribe, KPS Health Plans, Sound Grants, the International Seroptimus of Bremerton, Washington Cash, the A.Y. Petter Family Advised Fund held at the Foundation, and the Kitsap Conference Center. So please join me in thanking them for their investment here today. In your packets, you're going to find an agenda for the day, all of the speaker handouts, note pages, a participant list, and an event evaluation form. Additional program information and literature may be picked up by going around to the resource fair. We've got, I think, 27 or 28 vendors here today. And so utilize the break times and lunchtime to see what else they have for you. In your name badge, you'll find your lunch ticket and a red drawing ticket. We're going to do some fun drawings at the end of the day. You need to be present to win, so don't lose that ticket. And while mentioning the resource fair, I'd like to bring an upcoming event to your attention real quickly. The United Way Vision Council, Kitsap Community Resources, The Kitsap Food Bank Coalition and the Olympic College Foundation would like to invite you to join them for a movie. This is a documentary on poverty in the Northwest. It's set in Portland, but much like Kitsap, with a short discussion afterwards. It's April 10th at 6:30 p.m. in the Norm Dix Center. There are handouts about it at the food bank and the KCR resource tables. If you came as a group to Life on the Edge too, please don't be upset that you've been separated. This was by design to ensure that our table discussions are diversely represented. During some of these discussions, you will have the opportunity to self-select various areas of interest and can move about freely, so thank you for being flexible with us on that. There is a production crew from BKAT here today, and they are going to be filming various segments of our program. If you feel that you need to get up anytime during a session, please do so, but just be cognizant of where they are. And for the most part, he's located right back there against the wall. If you don't want to make your on-screen debut, don't turn around during the sessions, okay? And because we're filming today, please do what I'm doing right now. Pretend. I'm pulling out my phone, I'm turning it off right now, okay? Hopefully everybody else has done the same. Thank you for doing that. So, why are we filming in the first place? It's because at the close of our time together today, I'm going to be compiling the information that's shared by our speakers, as well as the information that we gleaned from our table discussions. And it's going to be put into a report that will be used to assist the Kitsap Community Foundation, the United Way, and the Suquamish Tribe in determining how best to distribute $1 million within the community. It's through a poverty alleviation project, and you're going to be hearing more about that this afternoon. But in our table discussions, we're going to be focusing on different types of work or focus areas, things like economic development, mental health, drug abuse, education, that type of thing. And we're going to be looking for your recommendations on the top 1 to 3 programs, projects, or services that should be created, undertaken, or enlarged to have the greatest impact on alleviating poverty. So we'll get back to that later. All right, enough notes about the day. Time to get started. So, poverty, what is it? Poverty is defined as the lack of basic human needs. It has many, many faces, no one's immune to it, and ultimately we all pay for its deteriorating effects. And as the day unfolds, my hope is that you engage with an open mind to not only challenge your perception and thinking about poverty and how it relates to homelessness, but to be an active part of this collective brain trust as we collaborate for a better, stronger, and healthier community. Think about this. What concerns you most about the vulnerable population in your community? What is it that keeps you awake at night in relation to that? I've asked the next 3 speakers to share with you what concerns them from their unique perspectives representing the county, the city, and a local business. So with that in mind, please hold your applause. I'd like to invite Charlotte Garrido, Kitsap County Commissioner, Greg Wheeler, Bremerton City Council President, and Elliot Gregg, President and CEO of Kitsap Credit Union, to come share their thoughts.
Good morning. It's wonderful to see so many faces and so many people that I work with on and off all the time, or know that county folks do. Let me see. The question was, what keeps me awake at night? I guess I have to say right up front, what keeps me awake at night, or what concerns me the most, is that we have lots of wonderful things, a wonderful support network in Kitsap County, and yet I don't often hear the actual voice of those who need the services and what it is that they need. As a policymaker, I don't hear those voices. And my personal past is one where I know some of the experiences, and I've done even international work with women in poverty and watched some of the policies that they were able to think that they weren't expressing policy, but they did it more beautifully than any policymaker could. So that voice is an important one for me. But I really want to talk about in county government, we do have probably one of the most terrific human services departments in any county, anywhere. And I don't know quite how that came about. I think it really could be reflective of the passions of Bert Ferruta, who spent 35 years in that position and really brought forward some wonderful programs. So today, Kitsap County brings in about $42–43 million a year that passes right through Kitsap County government, right back into our community, to many of your agencies to do the work that you do. That's a really big help. It's good for us to be able to have that understanding of the kinds of services that are happening, but it also gives us a view of some of the things that are not happening that could be happening. So personally, I think that a little bit better view of the linkage between need for a home and a need for a job, need for food, for transportation, and how that relates to health care. They're also integrally linked, that sometimes we get into our silos of looking at a particular piece of that system and forget that any citizen who doesn't have a home probably also doesn't have stable networking in those other areas. So we also, so it's really wonderful to see that Kitsap County can be helpful in funding. We also have advisory groups on lots and lots of issues, and many of you sit on some of those advisory groups too, so that we can hear representatives from certain areas of human services in Kitsap County. So we have an area agency on aging, we have a commission on children and youth, we have a substance abuse advisory committee. Let me think if I can remember some. I mean, there are just so many, it's hard to remember. Human Rights Council. We have about 30 advisory groups that help us understand our community a little bit more and help people in the community who are working in certain arenas be able to offer advice back to the policy, or even actually literally offer policy recommendations. As a commissioner, I also serve on a heck of a lot of boards. I'm on the Kitsap Transit, Housing Kitsap, Kitsap Public Health. Let me think what all I'm on the workforce, the 3-county workforce development, Olympic Consortium Workforce Development Board, the Peninsula Regional Support Network, which is mental health, and the list is long, so that at least I'm talking on a policy basis about a lot of different issues, and I can see some of the linkages that that do cross those agencies, and I think that's a really valuable experience for me to be able to recognize. But today you're going to see here in the lobby, there are lots of displays of the agencies that are working in our community. Some of you don't have displays, but I heard such a wonderful buzz early in the morning of people already talking about things that they're talking about. One of the best examples, I think, of coordination that I have seen in Kitsap County is the Housing Solutions Center. How many of you know about the Housing Solutions Center? Yeah, most of you do. So that you know that until about 2.5 years ago, we didn't have, all of our human services agencies worked so hard to do such a good job. And having worked at the YWCA for a little while, I know that many of us were working at crisis levels all the time ourselves. Not necessarily being paid a lot, but because we were passionate about the work ourselves. We were just flat out all the time. And now that we have the ability to organize at least the understanding of who is coming and asking or who might need housing assistance, we are able to coordinate with many of those human services agencies within Kitsap County and help to find the exact place where a particular family or individual will fit. And I believe that that has taken some of the burden, certainly not a lot, but some of the burden off of other agencies. but it's also helped to be able to pinpoint that this family, this individual, is housed, and now they're also going to be treated as a case that needs those wraparound services that are so essential to help them stabilize and move on with their lives. Excuse me. So I just want to, I think that the jobs that every one of you do, the passion that you bring to your jobs isn't appreciated enough because you are so busy. So I like that we're having this event today to be able to stop, pause a little bit, see who else is doing this kind of work in our community, and recognize that we are really doing, we are a small enough county, we know one another well enough that we can communicate and raise the bar, and I think we together do a heck of a good job. So I salute each of you for the work you do, and want you to know that Kitsap County is ready and willing to help. And one of the ways that your local commissioners have recently done that was to pass the 1/10% on sales tax so that we can address some of those mental health, substance abuse, therapeutic court abilities that may make a huge difference in reducing some of the people who need housing, who end up in our law and justice system, who really don't rightfully belong there. And then I'll just do a little plug. I heard a plug for a movie this morning. I actually host a sustainable cinema series in Port Orchard every month. And I find a film, you know, it might be about human services or food or the environment, but something that will cause us to talk to each other about issues that we all care about and maybe wouldn't otherwise talk about. So check the Dragonfly Theater down in Port Orchard once a month and see what the film is. And come by if it's something of interest to you, and don't ever hesitate to let me know a film that you might like to see. To end this up, one of the most powerful ones I've shown recently was called A Place at the Table. And it's, you know, it's about several people who are in poverty, who have all of the related case problems of being in poverty. But the most heartfelt one for me was a kid who was in school, and I can't remember, she was maybe 10, 11 years old. But her teacher thought she might be acting up in class because she didn't seem to pay much attention. And it took quite a while for that teacher to realize this kid was hungry. She didn't have food to eat, and her family was struggling to be able to provide even enough food for the family. So this child was underperforming at school because of hunger. And so watching, you know, how this family dealt with it, how we as a society deal with hunger, is a really important conversation for us to be having, because some of the behaviors that we're seeing may be attributable to lack of housing, lack of food, lack of health care that we need. And so there are different ways that we can convey this message to one another. Kitsap County does what it can, you do what you can, but together we can really make a huge, huge difference. Thank you.
Well, good morning. I'm Greg Wheeler, President of the Bremerton City Council. And I'm here to welcome you. I'd like to thank the Kitsap Credit Union and all the sponsors. This is a very valuable conversation we're going to have today. You know, a couple other things I do just to show where my interests and passions are. I serve on a couple boards in our community. Actually, many boards. I serve with several with the commissioner, but two others. One for Kitsap Community Resources, and I serve on their board of directors, and also the Salvation Army. I serve on their advisory board. And the reason I serve on these two boards, outside of all the other duties I have, is there's a tremendous need, not only in our city, but in my district, to provide these services that these two agencies offer. And also there's a need for more awareness. You know, that one of the questions asks, what concerns you? about the vulnerable. And I will say that it's being this population, and we have tended to group them all together, but they're misunderstood. Now everybody in this room understands that there's mental illness, there's medical disabilities, there's developmental delays, there's folks coming out of prison, there's people with police records. Every one of these things can put somebody in a vulnerable position. So when I'm out in the community, the brush is a little bit broader, and it's basically fear and misunderstanding of this population. And it's a tough situation because, especially in District 4, which is our downtown district, we are all grouped together, and there's still a job to be done as far as making folks aware, trying to teach folks that this population is us. We are all in this together. A lot of these things could happen to any one of us or to a family member, and it's just one of those things that we need to pull together on. I was at a Block Watch captain's meeting Monday night, and I go to these frequently. They were held up at our police station, and it's from Block Watch captains from around the community. And a lot of the concerns are from folks who are, they're attracting a lot of police presence to housing. They're maybe creating a disturbance in the neighborhood. But there's also concerns over having to evict folks who are mentally ill. And a lot of the landlords don't want to do that. But something will happen. Either they'll go off meds, or some type of their subsidy will run out. There'll be a gap in their case where they don't have their caseworker. But all of a sudden you have disruption. So you have police activity at your house. You have the neighborhoods concerned, and then you have an eviction. And we have a new homeless person in our community, and this is a person with a severe mental illness. And these stories come up over and over at these Block Watch meetings, and it's just we all understand this. We're here today to try to help come up with the solutions. I really applaud everybody in this room. I know I'm preaching to the choir here. Everybody understands this, but I sure appreciate this work that everybody does. There was one other question, and it's about what keeps me awake at night. And I think back to not only my representation of this downtown district, but I also think of my walk to work every day from over on the 600 block to Pennsylvania Avenue. I walk, across a couple streets, and I walk through Kiwanis Park, and I go to work. I've been doing this for years. So not long ago, I saw a young man. He was a middle-aged teenager. But he was sitting it was about 7 o'clock in the morning, it was January, and he was sitting in the park, Kiwanis Park. And he was sitting just like I am now, but his hands were crossed and his head was down. It was about 30 degrees, and it wasn't quite light yet. And I had to actually go the other way. I didn't get to talk with him, and I don't understand what the circumstances were, what choices he had made. I didn't know that, but I do know that the image really hit me. And there's something about this situation above all of the other cases I've seen and heard of that really struck me. And I don't know if it was the visual. I don't know if it was a person who's that young with so much promise that was sitting there suffering. The look of that person, the way they were sitting, you could tell they were just trying to will themselves and think themselves into another place. They did not want to be where they were sitting. They were suffering. So, I share this with you because I believe the person was homeless that night. And it was a horrible night. So, in closing, we have a lot to be thankful for. And I hope nobody forgets it in this room. Bremerton is doing wonderful things, but we also have a lot of work to do. And really, nobody should be left behind in our community, and until we can address all of these issues, there will be work to do. So thank you again for coming, and I wish us all a great day. Thank you.
Greetings all, I'm Elliot Gregg. I'm president of Kitsap Credit Union. And before I share my similar remarks, I first of all want to thank the commissioner and Charlotte and Greg for participating today, and for all of you that are participating on panels today. Your contribution makes this session valuable. And this is my one opportunity to particularly call out to Kathy. And Kathy, if you'd stand up, please. We recognize you've already spoken once, but I want to recognize you. As Kathy explained, she is our outreach coordinator for the credit union. And as I'll share later, we have as a part of our mission as an institution to do outreach to the community. And these things don't happen without Kathy's active involvement. She's been involved with the National Credit Union Educator Program and has taken it to the ground and made it a reality. And we're just delighted. We're delighted to hear that that national the credit union organization wants to bring her to Madison, Wisconsin to share what it took to put this on. And so she'll probably be going there in April. I don't know if she has her manager's approval, but she has mine. Again, thank you, Kathy, for making this happen. I was at the first On the Edge session, and I've learned a lot. It's different than today, but in the afternoon we had a role play where a room like this was in this conference hall. We had tables around the room, and each of them represented an agency that many of you represent. And as a participant, I was given enough money that was just short, I believe, of a full bus fare. And I was given the charge to get over to the transit center, and actually it was to the housing table, to pay my rent before I was evicted. But first, I had to deal with the fact that I just got a notice that my child had been thrown into juvenile detention. So there I got to face what many face, and I found that exercise enlightening to me, and I just wish that there were more people could have shared that experience and gotten some insight. Well, this morning is On the Edge 2, and like Greg and Charlotte, Kathy asked to reflect on two things, particularly that I should look at the issue of the vulnerable population as we see it from a business perspective. Why do we care? And then also reflect on what keeps us up at night, which is a little bit more personal. So I'd like to speak to both. And first on the business side, this may sound cold or whatever, but truly, from a business point of view, you can look at the value of and I'm not saying this pejoratively, of a productive person versus an unproductive person, a person who has a job versus someone who does not have a job. Someone who has a job is performing a function that has value to someone. It can be to an agency, it can be to a business, it can be to a consumer. And that role contributes positively to society, whether it be just that contribution or even, in many cases, a contribution in tax to our collective efforts. Contrast that to the unemployed person, the non-productive, not judging there, but just saying they're not in a role in which they are producing, and they become someone that needs to be supported by that same system. So for every person, from a business point of view, that we can support in that transition from being unemployed to employed, to having little value to offer to maybe having value to offer to an employer, that moves our community, our society, our country one step further towards greater collective health. So I think from a business point of view, it just makes great sense, because when you look at it in terms of the value of productivity. I'll come back to the business point in a second, but I want to reflect a little bit about the sleep at night. And I need to go back a little bit to my history, because I grew up in a very good, stable family. Grandparents married all their life. Parents married all of their lives. My grandparents, 3 of them, immigrants from Scandinavia. And so I grew up in an environment in the Midwest, rather safe, rather protected, and filled with the vision of how one could lift oneself up by your bootstraps, how you can make something of yourself, self-help. Then I went to college, and in college I was espousing my Midwestern values to my professor about bootstraps and self-help. And all of a sudden he paused and he looked at me and he said, "Elliot, you have chosen your parents well." That changed my thinking and for my life, and realizing that anything that I could do to extend the kind of good fortune that I had to others whose fortune in the start was not to be born into the kind of family that I was. So I'm going to flash forward now about 30 years to my arrival in Kitsap County. And that's when I met another mentor, like my professor. I met this person at a Coffee Oasis, my first hangout for lunch when I was working on Burwell. And I met a man named Dave Fredericks, who's in the room with us today. And Dave told me something about I didn't even know about. It was called couch surfing. And we've been involved in Bremerton High School and established our branch there, and we're very strong promoters. And I never realized as I walked down those halls and past all those kids that there were a certain number of those kids who at the end of the day had no house to go back to. They had to go stay on the couch of some friend, a relative, who knows what kind of meal they would have in the morning, who knows what kind of mentorship or support they would have. He taught me another lesson in the need and the value of what you all do to reach out and to make the difference for these folks that are born in less fortunate situations. So those 2 events probably bracket my passion for trying to make a difference, why I support Kathy so much in doing these programs, because I think it is the right thing to do. And last, I can take it back to business and draw a very solid line between the dot of my experience and my credit union. As many of you know, our credit union was started on a concept, not bootstraps, not self-help, but it was cooperative self-help. About 7 men, yes, back then it was men, got together and put, in the shipyard, put $5 each together to start this fund. And the fund was to enable that group to then loan money to new folks coming into the shipyard for tools. That was the beginning of Kitsap Credit Union. And notice that it was not about do it yourself. It was about people coming together in a cooperative manner, and I call it cooperative self-help. Well, now, we're a little bit larger now. We have about 100,000 members. And we're bigger, we're more bureaucratic. Some of us wear suits now. And, but one thing we wanted to do is to, and this is in our mission statement, is to continue to honor the legacy of the folks that started our credit union. And that means that we need to, even at our size, and now that we're very numbers driven, very, very business-like, we want to have a component of our efforts that do this outreach and support programs that try to make a difference in the community that makes up our credit union. So that is the business connection. We do it. I was asked earlier, why does the credit union do this? Now you know why. It's in our mission statement. It's in our legacy. And it's in our blood. And so we're glad to do it. And again, thank you all for participating today.
Thank you each for your comments and your contributions to this community. That was great to hear. It really gives us some good things to start thinking about for the day. I'm guessing that most of us here probably don't really fully comprehend the full scope of the housing and poverty issues that are facing our community on a daily basis, and that's why we're here. So I've asked Linda Stryskuth, our newest Kitsap County Commissioner, to give a state of housing address for us today. Appointed in January of 2014 to represent the citizens of Central Kitsap, Commissioner Stryskuth brings with her comprehensive knowledge and experience from many years of collaboration with government, nonprofit, community, and businesses. She also served on the Bremerton Housing Authority's board for 6 years. As the committee's chairperson, she initiated a rebranding and marketing effort for the organization, a long-range strategic plan, and oversaw development during some very critical years as they transformed the old West Park housing area into the beautiful and thriving Bay Vista area that we see today. This effort alone created hundreds of affordable housing opportunities in Kitsap County. So it's my distinct pleasure to welcome this morning Commissioner Linda Stryskuth.
Thank you, Kathy, and I'll echo the thanks of the other speakers. Sorry, I am a little tall. Of the other speakers this morning, and it really is wonderful to see so many people here today coming together to talk about some really important issues for our community. I also need to thank Kurt Weiss, who put together the data that I'm about to present. And Kurt is back in Washington, D.C. right now. Is that giving an echo? Actually at the NARROW conference, that's the National Association of Housing Authority and Redevelopment Officials. This week is Housing Week on the Hill, and he's back there advocating for resources. And so he is in a very important role back there, and I'm here in front of you today presenting some of this information. So again, thank you for being here today to have this conversation about key issues in our community. So here's the warning. I am about to share with you some pretty depressing news, some numbers and statistics that are frankly really troubling. I ask that you stay focused with me for the next maybe 20 minutes or so. This is going to be a little rough, and we are going to look at a lot of numbers that are indicators in our community. Individuals and families have a chance to thrive when their basic needs, food, clothing, and shelter, are met. The premise of this conference, as we've talked about, and its predecessor in 2012, is that there are many in our community that are living on the edge. The edge is a metaphor for the precipice that, when crossed or fallen over, results in hardships that strain a family relationships, and begin a rapid spiral downward into a state of panic and hopelessness. Some of you have expressed to me this morning that when you did the role plays last year, those were some of the feelings that you felt. Housing plays a critical role in keeping us away from the edge, particularly when that housing is safe, affordable, and decent. So what is housing? Or what is affordable housing? Affordable to whom and at what cost? I think it would be safe to say here in Kitsap County, we have an adequate supply of housing at various price ranges. The federal government defines affordable housing as an amount that does not exceed 30% of a person's gross income. For someone working full-time or 40 hours a week for minimum wage, which I'll remind everyone in the room, that's $9.32 an hour, an affordable rent would be $485 a month. The average apartment rent in Kitsap County is $806 a month. And to make that average rent affordable under HUD standards, they would need an annual gross income of $32,000 a year. The reality is, affordable housing is out of reach for many. There are many reasons for it. It could be a lack of adequate and stable income, a lack of education or job skills. Those are things that can lead to unemployment or underemployment, thus reducing income and options for affordable housing. A lack of, behaviors such as drug or alcohol addictions also have a significant impact on income and the stability to find and maintain adequate affordable housing. We have seen a shift, and this is a national shift, but it's also one we've seen here in Kitsap County, towards renting rather than owning a home. The renter's share of U.S. households climbed from 31% in 2003 to 35% in 2013. While renting is common among young adults, more than 1/3 of the renters we see are aged 35 to 54. After the Great Recession began in 2008, the share of renters paying more than 30% of their income rose to 50%. Nearly 1/4 of our renters have an annual income of $15,000, which means housing can cost no more than $375 a month to meet that HUD standard I mentioned. So let's talk a little bit about supply and demand. In Kitsap County, for every 100 extremely low-income households, and again, I'll remind you that's that 30%, there are only 29 affordable housing units or rental units. So we might ask, why isn't the private market filling that gap? The answer is simple. The economics really don't pencil out. Without a subsidy of some kind, a private developer cannot build or operate rental housing at a cost an extremely low-income household, or even one at 60% of that median, can afford. Another good question, why doesn't the local, state, or federal government do more? It's a really big gap. Well, that's all about priorities, and I think there probably isn't anyone in the room who hasn't read the paper and seen the way many of our competing issues have played out in terms of those government decisions. We have people advocating for a long list of critical public needs: transportation, healthcare, education, defense, Social Security. The list goes on and on. Kitsap County mirrors the national average with some of the numbers that are very troubling. And this is an important slide because it really illustrates how vast the gap is for eligible households or those who qualify for assistance. The number of available units, as I said a minute ago, is far less than the demand for households living in poverty. Even worse than this number of 5,100 is the fact that there's very little turnover in affordable rental units. I'll give you an example from the Bremerton Housing Authority. The Bremerton Housing Authority has 510 affordable rental units in its inventory. For those 510 units, there currently is a wait list of 1,457 people waiting for assistance. With an average turnover rate of less than 15 apartments a month, the people on that wait list are going to be waiting for years before they have a hope of assistance with those rental units. And there's little prospect of significant expansion of affordable housing units in the near future due to the priorities at local, state, and federal government dollars and resources that I mentioned a minute ago. Unfortunately, there are further signs of distress for us here in Kitsap County. Last year, there was an average of 50 eviction actions brought before the court each month, and this number does not include those initiated that didn't proceed to a hearing. With the exception of 1 year in the last 5, we've seen this increase steadily. When Kurt and I were talking about evictions, it took me a little while to really understand why this was such an indicator for housing. But if we think about it, an eviction judgment is made against an individual and it becomes a matter of public record that's placed on their credit record. Such an action makes it that much more difficult for the individuals that are represented here to rent anytime in the future. I've talked about HUD's standard for affordable housing and the gap that we see, and the result all too often is homelessness, and that's the way that plays out in its extreme. Insufficient income continues to be the major driver for homelessness in our community and really across the nation. This number of 500 does not include the individuals and families who are temporarily sheltered, that is, staying with friends and families when they can't afford housing of their own. Some of that couch surfing that Elliot spoke about a minute ago. Primary contributing factors of homelessness include 53% state they are homeless due to economic factors including job loss. 37% say that it's because of a family breakup or domestic violence. 30% are re-entering the community from jail, prison, or mental institutions. 27% are evicted or ending a temporary living arrangement. 18% of this number is attributed to medical or mental health issues, and another 18% is attributed to alcohol and drug use. Excuse me. On the screen you see a quote that I'm going to read in just a minute because I'm not sure if everyone can see it in the back, but it's an example of a story that everyday providers in our community hear something similar to this. Those are stories that come into Housing Kitsap, the Bremerton Housing Authority, Kitsap Community Resources, Catholic Community Services, Coffee Oasis, Housing Resource Board. This was a call that came into one of those local agencies just this last year. My brother is 66, a felon, is on dialysis, and is in the Monroe prison. He'll be released in October of 2014, and he wants to live in the Bremerton-Silverdale area as soon as he's released. Is there housing available to someone in his situation? I really appreciate suggestions or solutions you may have. His only income will be Social Security at that time. Not all our stories are perhaps as severe as this one, but each contain a common plea for help with that basic need of human shelter. So what are the options? What would you suggest if you took this phone call? The intent of our gathering today is to really focus our attention and efforts on that question. And I think it's a significant community concern. Commissioner Garrido mentioned the Housing Solutions Center, and this is one of the bright spots in our community. The Housing Solutions Center is a central agency that provides one-stop information and counseling, referral services for low-income households with affordable housing needs. And some of the good news is they were able to help just under 3,000 individuals last year who had an average income of $8,400. Of those assisted last year, 27% were homeless, 28% had been evicted, 33% were forced to move because they could no longer afford their dwelling, 10% had adequate and affordable housing, or were considered stably housed but were looking for another option, and 3% sought assistance for an unknown reason. Just a few more slides and statistics, I promise. This slide really demonstrates the strong connection between institutionalization and homelessness. Substance abuse problems are both a consequence of and a leading factor in the continuance of homelessness. Nearly half of the 9,909 clients discharged from state residential treatment facilities for chemical dependency had an indication of housing need, yet only 18% received assistance. Nearly half of all homeless and 70% of our homeless veterans suffer from substance abuse consequences, and the majority of those with a substance abuse disorder also suffer from moderate or severe mental illness. This slide is actually a national statistic, but it's one that holds true for us here in Kitsap County. And that is the estimates of 20 to 25% of the homeless population are people that do suffer from severe mental illness. In Washington State, it's estimated that 30% of the clients discharged from state mental health hospitals, or that's 1,792 individuals last year, had an indication of housing need. And similar to the statistic on the previous slide, only 17% received assistance with housing. Perhaps the saddest of all statistics, oops, did we skip a slide? Perhaps the saddest of all statistics is the one for school-aged children. And this data is collected from our local school districts, compiled by the State Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction. The homeless definition for children is someone who lacks a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence. This definition includes children and youth sharing housing due to loss of housing, economic hardship, or a similar situation. It includes our kids in our community who are living in motels, trailer parks, campgrounds, due to lack of other accommodations. These are children and youth living in emergency or transitional shelters or waiting for foster care. Often these kids are living in cars, in parks, on benches, abandoned buildings, substandard housing. Some are in our transit shelters. I think one of the things that's most important about recognizing this is, as Commissioner Garrido and Councilmember Gregg talked about a moment ago, no child can thrive in school if they lack stable housing and those basic needs. So where do we go from here? What are we to do with the grim statistics I've shared with you this morning concerning income, homelessness, and the lack of affordable housing? What can be done to prevent a slip over the edge into economic hardship, poverty, and the loss of adequate shelter? It's not a simple answer, and it's not one answer. It's really many. Thus, our purpose for being here today. We're here with this wonderful group of talented professionals, community leaders, people that care about these issues. And the really great thing is, I think all of you, like me, believe that there's a power of community, that we can come together and look for solutions and solve these issues for our community. I'm looking forward to engaging in our discussions today and of identifying priorities and solutions. On your table, and I'm going to check my watch because we do have a few minutes before our break. On your table is a poem entitled "The Ambulance in the Valley." And this is a poem that was written by Joseph Malins in 1895, and it's a poem about prevention. I'm going to ask you to each read this at your table and take a few minutes to discuss it before the break. I'm going to ask you to consider it as we move through the day. And my question for you to consider as you read this is, are we focusing on the right things? Is it the fence at the edge of the precipice, or is it the ambulance in the valley to rescue those who've fallen over the edge? Again, I thank you for your time. I appreciate your dedication, your willingness to have these conversations today. I'm looking forward to your input that helps us set policy on how to focus on the right things. And together we can seek solutions to help solve these important issues. Thank you.
Sorry, I am shorter. Why don't you take just a few minutes, as Commissioner Streiskuth suggested, and maybe have somebody at your table read it to your table and have some discussion, and we'll be back in just a moment. I felt bad that I had to interrupt your great conversations that you were having about the Ambulance in the Valley poem. So I just wanted to take about 5 minutes, and if there are any tables that would like to share, what was the one takeaway thought from your conversations around that? Yes.
Most of the clients that we might serve aren't at
What, most of the clients you serve
aren't on the cliff. They're really at the bottom meeting the ambulance.
Okay, most clients aren't really on the edge of the cliff. They're at the bottom meeting the ambulance already.
Yeah, there's a large number.
A large number. Great. Anybody else? What was the takeaway from your conversations?
It's better to be preventative than to be reactionary.
Better to be preventative than reactionary. That's great. Anybody else? Oh, right here.
I'll do it.
We wrestled a lot with that gap in the slide between the need and the supply, and how difficult it is to get public support for levies and other funding. We talked about what the barriers were to that fear of having those folks in our neighborhood, things like that. So we thought that there were some real challenges here to getting public policy in line with this.
Great. Anybody else?
We've talked about the fact that you almost have to work both sides, because people are over the cliff and there are people on the edge of the cliff, and you can't fix one without the other right away. The other thing we also talked about was a lot of our programs tend to require the person to fall off the cliff before they get the aid. And so we took it up a higher notch that said we have to look at systemically, why have we put our programs together like that?
Very good. Anybody else?
So Carrie and I were just talking a moment ago, and I think part of the issue is, you know, these services are available, but how do you get the public's perception to change, to want to be involved, to help their community? You know, there's such a perception, and I used to have it about, you know, homeless choosing to be homeless, that they're wanting to be, you know, the in need population, you know, or, oh, woe is me. So how can we start getting the information out to the public to show that the issues that we're facing are not because of desire, because that they have reached this point for whatever their social economic situation is. And then I think once you get the public's opinion to change, you're starting to get more support, and then you can start working on the mental health and the drug abuse problems based on that. So how do we do that? How do we get this information that we have today to the general public, instead of being, you know, already at the bottom and knowing that you need these services?
Good question.
Advertisers make millions of dollars framing concepts and perceptions to us and getting us to buy in. But most of us, we can't do that over this issue. The poem had said something about the people had come to a consensus about those people that fall over the cliff. And I think sometimes we should start thinking about how can we make it, I guess, apparent to them on how it affects them. And we were talking on our table about children who are unable to learn, whether they're couch surfing at night, on the streets, or not eating. They come to classrooms with everyone's children. And the teacher has the responsibility of teaching. How can she, if these children who never had bootstraps to pull themselves up on are in the classes? So the dynamic is to, how can we frame and promote these ideas to people so that they see that it does affect them? The prison justice system is the same thing, like the cliff, where we spend so much money to incarcerate people, but yet the educational funding and programs have been cut severely for individuals that once they're incarcerated to actually change their life, to be able to come out and be productive. When they come out, they're in the same situation many times than when they came in.
Great, thank you. Anybody else? Oh, one more right here. Thank you.
So we were talking at our table about prevention, which I think the poem really focuses on, but also talking about how many people are currently in need. And I was recalling that about 10 years ago when the federal government rolled out their big homelessness initiative, they used the analogy of we need to both close the front door to homelessness by prevention, and we need to open the back door and let everybody who is currently homeless out and into a path to self-sufficiency again. So both things are really important as we think about strategies to address poverty.
Great, thank you. You know, these are amazing comments, and I wish I could be in every one of these conversations because it's just juicy. So hang on to these thoughts because we're going to use these a lot this afternoon as we go into our group discussions. I know that at some point in time we've all probably wondered to ourselves, you know, really how bad can it be for people? I mean, I've had struggles, I've made it through, you know, what's up with them? You know, in fairness, we've probably all thought that at one point or another, even though we work with it and we see it, you know, we're human. That thought crosses our mind. So to address these thoughts, it's my pleasure to introduce to you Sarah Van Cleve. She's the Director of Housing at the Bremerton Housing Authority. Monica Bernard, Manager of the Housing Solutions Center. And Cole Medina, the Executive Director of the Kitsap Community Foundation, who will share some local stories with you. Let's give them a warm welcome.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me okay? These people are shorter than me. You can hear me okay? Thank you all for coming today. It's a real pleasure to look around the room and see everybody. As Kathy said, I'm Cole Medina, the Executive Director of the Kitsap Community Foundation. It's a great pleasure for the Community Foundation to be one of the co-sponsors of this event. We titled this section A Glimpse of Real Life. What we want to do is try to give you a moment to actually feel poverty as much as we all can here in this room, which is not really very much. But we want to try to take you there as much as we can. So you'll see on your table 3 case studies, and in the slides that are in your folders, the very last page of the slides that Linda was taking you through has 2 of those case studies on it. The 3rd case study is not listed on those slides because it came in a little late in the process. What we're going to do is go through them one by one. I am going to interview Sarah or Monica. Each one of them is familiar with different case studies. These are actual real-life case studies. They know the people who these case studies are about, and they're going to give us more details than we have there. So I'm going to sit down and interview first Sarah about case study 1, and then I'm going to ask you a couple questions and ask you to discuss those questions at your tables about case study 1. We'll give you about 10 minutes to talk about case study 1, and then we'll do case study 2, and then we'll do case study 3. So let's get to it. Case study 1 is first. I'll come and sit down with you. Okay. Sarah, what can you tell us about case study 1?
Well, I'll read what you guys have in front of you. It's a single male adult who has custody of his young daughter. He has frequent run-ins with law enforcement. He's a regular abuser of illegal narcotics, including crystal meth. His education stops at a GED. He's unemployed and has limited skills. No stable housing, and is couch surfing. Applies for subsidy, receives it, and moves into subsidized housing. Other things that you should know about this young man is that we're often, cut from the same cloth as our parents. So where we look at his situation and we think, wow, a parent using drugs, breaking the law, no real housing, that's kind of the world he grew up in. He didn't know any different. He didn't have the skills to ask the different questions or navigate a better life for himself.
Okay. So does he have an actual criminal record?
Yes.
And is he living in rent-subsidized housing now?
No.
Okay. So he applied for and received it, but he's not in it at this moment in time.
Right.
Okay. Is that because he chose not to take it, or?
No, he's moved on.
Oh, I mean at the time of this story.
Oh, at the time of the story, yes, he was. He battled with homelessness, and his battle started, or his journey started, as a 16-year-old homeless boy. And so, as he moved through his life and made decisions, it was a roller coaster ride. And yes, when he started his move towards self-sufficiency, it began by getting stable housing for him and his daughter.
At the point we're talking about in this case study, he just moved into rent-subsidized housing,
yes.
Let's say.
Okay, yeah.
Previous work history that you know?
Not up until he got stabilized housing. Before that, it's a common factor that if you use drugs and you become addicted to drugs, the best way to get more drugs is to sell drugs.
Okay. And at the time that we're talking about, when he moved into rent-subsidized housing with his daughter, how old was his daughter? Do you know? More or less?
I'm talking backwards because I know how old she is now. She was probably 7, maybe 5 to 6, 7.
Okay. Does anyone have a burning question you want answered before we ask you to start talking about this? Yes. I'll get it. What about the mother? So where's the mother?
Well, unfortunately, sometimes you end up like 2 peas in a pod. So mom was going down the same track.
Okay. Any other just burning factual questions before we ask you to talk about this? Yes, Beth.
Have you been engaged in any
Is he in any recovery programs?
Yes.
Okay, for his drug addiction. At this time?
At this time.
Yeah.
At the time that he was homeless and moving into subsidized housing, yes.
Elliot?
Part of that, was he responding to the?
Yes.
I'll take one more question.
My question is, you mentioned that at 16 was when his homeless journey began. What was his home life like before age 16?
Couch surfing was his life for the majority of it.
All right, so I'm gonna let us start talking at our tables. I can't give you all the information, so you'll have to fill in the gaps at your tables and do your best with this. The questions for you to answer are really pretty straightforward. First, just at your table, how does this make you feel? What do you think about this situation? Second, what do you think this person should do to become a healthy and stable member of our society? You know, talk about the services you know of at your table that this person could take advantage of to try to improve their life and become a healthy member of our society. And three, and we're going to ask you all to answer this question by raising your hands. And this is a very pointed, difficult question, but it's to make the point that people in poverty or living near poverty have to make very difficult decisions. Let's assume that there is a brother who lives in Wisconsin in a stable family who does not really know the daughter and has not been a part of her life. Should the person in our case study give up custody of his daughter to go live with his brother or not? So that's your question. You have about 10 minutes to talk about that, and when we come back together, I'm just going to ask you all to raise your hands on your answer to that last question. Okay, everyone, I'm sorry to interrupt your conversations, but I want to keep us moving along, so if you could just wrap up, we'll move to the next case study. I'll just give you a few seconds. It sounded like you were having some interesting conversations there. We gave you a little longer to talk about that one since all three case studies have some similar issues you'll be talking about each time. So we're going to move on to case study 2. But before we do that, I'd just like to see a show of hands. I'm going to ask you if you personally feel that he should have given up custody of his daughter or not. So if you feel that in that situation he should have given up custody of his daughter, raise your hand. Well, to the brother. To the brother, the fictional brother that I mentioned. I see, I don't know, maybe 10 hands in the air and some people saying temporarily. I hear a lot of temporarily coming from that side of the room. So who would hold up their hand for no, he should keep custody of his daughter in this situation? Vast majority of the room. With all these questions, there's not a right or wrong answer, I don't think. It's just a tough question. So case study 2. Sarah, what can you tell us about that?
Okay, so we have a single adult male with a teenage son. He's a disabled veteran, addicted to pain medication and methadone, formerly a truck driver but lacking his CDL, and if I didn't mention, he's unemployed. Thanks. And homeless, forced due to the sale of his unit.
Anything else you want to add?
One of the significant differences between case study number 1 and number 2 is that case study number 2 was not raised in homelessness, had access to education and a good family life, and so his family life changed as an adult, and the decisions that he made were not indicative of how he was raised.
What is the disability that he's suffering from?
That I don't know.
Okay. I mean, do you know if it was a physical disability, a mental disability?
Yeah, so the pain medication was due to a physical disability that he endured while he was serving in the Army, and then coupled with diagnosed depression.
Okay. Do you know if, and again, this is all at the time of this case study, do you know if he had any income at all?
No, he did not.
Was it on any sort of welfare or anything? No income at all?
No, 0 income.
Do you know the age of the teenage son?
16.
16. You mentioned the biggest difference between the first case study and this case study. Are there any other differences you want to point out that you think might help the conversation?
Well, the first case study, being raised in poverty, probably had an idea of what was out there, possible resources, you know, just even accessing the food bank, or, you know, even the wherewithal to apply for subsidized housing. Case study 2 kind of just spiraled. When he got out of the Army, he couldn't find a job, and you have, when you become a disabled vet, you still have to go through the process of navigating a system. And I think the overwhelming barriers that he had, coupled with the depression and using pain medication, and then, and for those of you who don't know, that methadone is actually a synthetic form of heroin, so he was originally a heroin addict and then switched to methadone, trying to get off of that is just devastating in and of itself. So I hate to use the phrase kind of head in the sand, just didn't know how to navigate the system. He didn't know how to change his choices, and just kind of became a victim of his own circumstance by not asking the right questions and kind of caving into those barriers, until he ended up at the bottom of the valley waiting for the ambulance.
So before I release you to talk at your tables, does anyone have a burning question, factual question? Yeah.
Is he eligible for veterans benefits?
Can you say that a little louder?
Is he eligible for veterans benefits?
Is he eligible for veterans benefits?
Yeah, was he honorably or dishonorably?
I don't know about whether he was honorably or dishonorably discharged. I do know that, and at this current situation, he was not eligible for his VA benefits.
Stick a hand in the back there. Yep, you. Wait for the mic, please.
Is this person physically able to drive?
Yes.
I don't know if y'all heard that. I don't think the mic was on. Is he physically able to drive?
Does he have a current driver's license?
Yeah, he had a driver's license, but no CDL driver's license.
Did he ever have one?
No.
Okay, I will take one more question.
Where's his mother?
Question is, where is his mother?
I don't know that one.
Do you mean the son's mother? The son's mother. Yeah, not his mother.
I was like, oh, I don't know.
Okay, so your questions for this one are the same. Just how does this make you feel to be in this type of situation? What types of services, if you were in this situation, would you try to make use of to make yourself a healthy and stable member of our society? And the specific kind of pointed question for you all to consider is, if someone came along and you were in this situation and gave you $1,000 to do with as you pleased, would you use that $1,000 to get your CDL license again so that you were employable, or would you use it to get an apartment for 2 months? Which one? All right, everybody, if you could wrap up your conversations, I'd appreciate it. We'd like to move on to the third and final case study. Okay, I'm going to ask you this same question. I'm going to ask for a show of hands again. In this case study, if you were in this position and someone just magically gave you $1,000, would you spend that on your employability, or would you spend it on secure housing for 2 months? So, if you would spend it on your license, please raise your hand. Interesting. It's about half the room, I'd say. If you spend it on the apartment, please raise your hand. That's more like a third, so I'd say a little more of the people in the room said on the license. Interesting. Case study 3. Monica, could you please explain that to us?
Yeah, case study number 3, she has a name, and her name is Jane. And a few years ago, she moved here from Georgia, and she was following a man, is what she told me. And she wound up in Everett with a job making $14 an hour. She had 4 children. She was an employment specialist. And she got stopped one day with a speeding ticket, And then the officer discovered she had some unpaid fines. Her license was suspended. She disclosed that to her employer, who gave her a couple of weeks to work it out. She wasn't able to work it out. She lost her job. And she was 2 months into a new lease, a 1-year lease. She wasn't able to make the rent. And within a matter of a month, she was homeless with a judgment against her for the vacation of that lease that she's still actually today paying off. She moved in with her niece into a 1-bedroom apartment with her 4 kids and her niece's 1-year-old child. That lasted about a month. Then she started couch surfing with some friends in Tacoma. And she went from, she said, I would never spend more than 1 week at any one place. But then she ran out of couches. And then she had enough child support to pay for, she was trying to get her kids in school, and she wasn't able to get them into their old school district, so the only school district she was able to get them in because of her address challenges, lack of one, was South Kitsap. So she was driving her kids 20 miles to school, and that's how her child support was used. She applied for TANF. She got on TANF, and then they started aggressively collecting the actual level of child support, which turned out to be higher than TANF. So she got to keep the higher level of child support, but then got off TANF, which meant she couldn't get their employment services anymore. And so she continued to couch surf, and she had enough money to pay 3 weeks a month at the Vista Motel in Port Orchard, and then she couch surfed the other month. And it got so bad making the rent that she ended up moving her and her 4 children into a neighbor's unit, a neighbor she didn't know, a strange man, who let her move in. And she said, I slept with one eye open, but it was better than sleeping in the car. She did take on 2 more step kids in the process who were going to be facing CPS custody, and she told me, said, why did you do that? And she said, well, what the hell is 2 more? So with that, that's her story.
Thank you, Monica. Can you tell us the ages of the kids here, range?
Yeah, they were, at the time of her going into homelessness, I want to say they were ranging in age between 2nd and 8th grade. So 4 kids between, spread in those grade levels.
And the kids all were couch surfing with her?
Yeah, they were all couch surfing with her. And because she moved here from Georgia, she absolutely had no family to fall back on.
Okay. Actually answered the rest of my questions. Are there any just quick factual questions you guys want answered? Yes.
I'm sorry, I don't know what the acronym for TANF is.
Oh, I'm sorry.
What is TANF?
Temporary aid for needy families. It's what many people used to know as welfare. It's gone by several different names, but in her case, she was collecting about, I want to say, $600 a month in TANF, maybe a little bit more.
Any others? Yeah.
So when she lost her TANF benefits, did she also lose medical care for the children?
Question was, when she lost her TANF benefits, did she also lose medical care for the children?
That didn't come up in my discussion with her last Friday, so I don't know.
All right, one more.
The 2 kids that she took on, is she getting any assistance for them?
Is she getting any assistance for those 2 additional children?
No, and she wasn't getting any assistance, and she only had them, I want to say, for a period of a couple of years. But, well, actually, I take that back. She did tell me that, and this happens later in the story, that she was able to get a higher level of TANF because of those 2 kids. I take that back. She did tell me that. But that took a while to get to that point.
Okay, so the question for you all, again, please just sink into this for a moment and think about what it would be like to be in this position. And I think this is a really great case study because she's someone like many of us who just suddenly fell into this. Think about what that would be like and what you can do to try to get yourself out of this. And the specific question that we'd like you all to answer is this. Again, it's the $1,000 magic question. If you receive $1,000, let's assume that it's winter. I know winters aren't that horrible here, but it still is cold here in winter. Her children didn't have warm clothing to go to school. They don't have the books and supplies they need for school. Are you going to spend your $1,000 on your children, getting them the clothing, the supplies they need for school, or are you going to spend it on 2 months of secure housing? everybody. You can wrap it up. We'd appreciate it. Since you guys are really having a hard time answering this question. So, once again, I'll finish this by asking you all to show with a raise of hands whether you would spend your $1,000 on clothes and supplies, school supplies for the children, or on secure housing for a couple of months. So, if you would spend the money on the children, please raise your hands. Nobody. Oh, we got one hand. We got one hand over here. Now, because some people might say, I'm not going to choose either one of those, I'll finish the question. Raise your hand if you would spend the money on housing.
In Georgia.
Yeah.
In Georgia.
In Georgia.
In Georgia? Right. That's true. Okay. Buy a ticket to Georgia and a house in Georgia. Perfect. Okay. Well, I hope this exercise was interesting for you all. This is the moment in the day where we really wanted to kind of force you to think about what it feels like to be in poverty, as much as we can here in this room. At the end of the day, we're going to close this conference by telling you the actual real outcomes to these case studies. So that's how we'll close the day.